but I lost the competition of patience. But let's get going. I think we will have exactly 2 panelists joining us in just a bit. But my name is Siim Sikkut. I'm the government CIO in Estonia here, and I have been looking forward to this session throughout many weeks now, exactly for the reasons because quite frankly, the questions and the topic ahead of us. When we started with Digital Summit, especially last year when we brought the focus on AI, what we saw and felt was the biggest value in these sort of discussions was actually to very practically, more hands-on than perhaps ministers or otherwise can have a chance to share on mutual experiences. To really talk about, there's so much talk about the potential of AI, but how are we really using it in all different governments? What is the actual value we have seen of the first work on AI? So I'm hoping that exactly in today's session, we get to talk a bit about that, to hear from 10 countries at these tables in the sense of what have been the most useful things you have done with AI in your government so far. But secondly, a very core question that has come to our minds, at least in Estonia here, when we started working on our AI initiatives, was to say it's easy to get going, but the great challenge of capability and capacity is ahead of us, in the sense that, of course, the talent availability it's quite a technically uphill struggle to do things AI way and so forth. So how do we raise capacity? What are some of the, perhaps, initiatives, policy measures, so forth, we have to put in place to make sure that all of our public sector can go AI way? And so we'll be happy, I will be very happy to hear any sort of experience you have in this regard, any sort of ideas you have in this regard, anything we could do potentially together between the countries in this regard. So I hope this frames up the panel a bit. The way we have set it up is to first make a sort of round to the table by countries, to hear exactly in 4 minutes or so on your use cases, on your ideas, on your experiences on how to scale capacity for AI in our governments. And then based on that, we'll try to sort of have a bit of joint discussion and also, of course, engage the audience. We are, I have to say, one of the most popular sessions throughout the event, so sorry if you're a bit sort of in the sidelines, but we will have some mics go around and allow you to chip in just a tiny bit. Only one technical note for the speakers. We are not that advanced with AI yet. You still have to press the button on the mic to exactly have it work and and for you to be heard by everyone else. So exactly, please do that when it's your turn. Without further ado, let's get going, and we will have a sort of eclectic jumping between the countries. So let's see if you figure the algorithm out. But I will now very shamelessly use the opportunity of being the host country and have us talk first, if you don't mind. So joining me and taking my seat for a few minutes now will be Mr. Velsberg, the Chief Data Officer for our government, to share, what have been our sort of first lessons learned, our use cases, and yes, hopefully get the discussion going. So Ott, yours.
Hi. So, as Siim introduced, Ott Velsberg. I'm the Chief Data Officer, Estonian government. So, before I jump into what we in Estonia have actually done thus far, I'm going to concentrate on how we see the role of Estonian government in Estonia. So, we see that the government has a pioneer role. So, we are kind of the forerunner, and we see that we need to set an example for the public and private sector. To support the uptake of AI throughout the government and also in the private sector, we are right now concentrating on this area called core AI components. So different tools that are free of charge, open source, and both different public organizations and private sector can use them, redevelop, retrain, or in some cases, just use them. So this is one of the strategic approaches we have right now. So core components, for example, chatbot, sentiment analysis, image recognition. So core competencies and different organizations can retrain and use them for their benefit. We also see that there is a larger ambition. We want to have 50 AI use cases by the end of next year. Currently, there are 23 use cases in the public sector. So we are roughly halfway there. So everything possible to increase the uptake, we need to do that, actually. We want to get at least 5 core components, so solutions that are open source to everyone, including all of you, done by 2020. So 5 of them. But maybe just some of the concrete solutions. So I mentioned 23 of them right now. In agriculture, all the things we do are with satellite image recognition. For example, we understand whether farmlands have been mowed. Why is this important? We, as a government, pay roughly 350 million euros each year as a subsidy. And it's wide known in Europe as a whole that the on-spot checkups, whether farmers actually mow the farmland, and to automate that, we are now using satellite image recognition. Similarly, we have been identifying different tree and crop species to get a better understanding of what resources there are in the nation as a whole. From this same satellite image projects, we plan to start recognizing where ice-breaking vessels should move. So where is ice? Ice-breaking vessels cost a lot of money, so it's maybe more oriented to countries that are more up north, but still helps to save a lot of money for the government. There are other use cases from image recognition. We track the number of cars throughout the streets of Tallinn. We are collecting point of interest data. In Estonia, you have private, government, and municipal-owned roads. To understand where different road signs, point of interest objects are, we're actually using image recognition. Public officials have dash cameras on their dashboard, so understanding from that side, extremely beneficial so far. In healthcare, we use risk stratification, so understanding different patient needs, and depending on that, when the patient should be brought into the hospital or general practitioner. Other more simple use cases, or not simple, but still, we have X-Road, our data exchange layer, detect anomalies from there. Some organizations detect anomalies from depending on the public official computer, extremely beneficial as well. You have a typical level of characteristics, what websites you visit, what behavior you have, and so on. So anyways, this is from Estonian side. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ott. And clearly, we are only starting to scratch the surface when it comes to using sort of even the simplest forms of AI in our government here. And as Ott was sort of saying, our core approach is that we have a very technical approach how to scale things. We're seeing, can we reuse and literally have a platform approach to putting out some of the models that can be then reused by different agencies. But perhaps to jump further, and as we are among friends here, I'll be on first name basis. So perhaps, exactly, Nicky, you want to get going on the UK experience?
Well, Siim, thank you very much indeed. Good morning to my colleagues, and thank you for hosting this fantastic summit with very thought-provoking presentations so far. As we've already heard, AI technology holds the potential to solve some of the great public sector challenges, as well as the sort of other challenges of our age. And I thought the last presentation downstairs on the environment was really very interesting as well. And I think it's also right, as we just heard, that we can't see innovation as solely the preserve of private companies. I think we've just heard that government has a pioneer role, and I think that's absolutely right. And it's no doubt that the governments that succeed in the future will be the ones that embrace technology and use it to create a stronger link with their citizens. But I think also, as we've heard downstairs, the challenge is about getting citizens to understand and to embrace technology, but also not to understand some of the risks around it, and getting public buy-in is very important too. Automation AI presents a huge opportunity to make public services more effective and more efficient. And of course, as we've just heard, used properly, they can mean more accurate predictions, improved accuracy, and smarter decision-making. And for people working in the public sector, it can create more free time to spend on thinking of more creative ways then to improve the services. So far in the UK has been a pioneer for digital government. We put all of our government services online through our single gov.uk portal, an approach that has been replicated across the world. You can do almost anything from gov.uk, from getting a divorce to filing your tax return. I'm not sure how many people do that on the same day, but maybe. And the approach has saved, obviously, billions of pounds for taxpayers in the UK, but it's given a more positive experience of interactions with government. And I think people do expect more and more to be able to do these things online. The UK wants to be a pioneer in AI too, and we think that there are many processes that can be transformed, everything from tax returns to planning applications, using intelligent automation and machine learning. We've done a recent AI for government review that identified key barriers to adoption by the public sector, and we're investing money and resources into putting these right. So last year we announced plans to expand the use of AI in our health sector, and again we've just heard how the Estonian government is obviously working on that too. This set out the latest machine learning technology that can help doctors to diagnose life-threatening diseases earlier and more effectively. We're also developing new technologies that can identify extremist videos and flag them for taking down from the internet. We've also created the world's first government office for artificial intelligence and a centre for data ethics, and ethics was a word that was used downstairs as well, data ethics and innovation. So we want to put AI and ethics at the heart of what we are doing as a government. It's also important, of course, for the government to create the right environment. We need to support the work that's going on, obviously, in the private sector, and supporting innovation through public sector procurement, and encouraging data sharing where possible. So, for example, there could be unforeseen uses, such as our UK fire services are using food hygiene data to predict the fire risk for restaurants. So we're supporting the development of data trusts to help organisations access and share data in a safe, legal and ethical way. I think as government ministers know that public services are at their heart, all about improving the lives of our citizens. And there's no doubt that the AI and the data revolution has given governments a real opportunity to do this more efficiently and more effectively. So it is important that we keep working together, and that's why these summits are so important on this mission, and that we do keep learning from best practice all around the world. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say today. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Thank you. You're like on the second. But perhaps just to follow up with one small question like that, and as I said before, we'll have roundtable discussion just, once everyone finishes, so be ready with your impressions. But you mentioned Office for AI, and I think this is quite a sort of unique setup also globally, so perhaps you want to say just a few words. What's the role of this office when it comes to especially, coordinating, public sector AI uptake?
So the office is very much, the last government, we obviously had a change of Prime Minister in the last couple of months, but the last government had set an industrial strategy. And one of the grand challenges was AI, the use of AI and data. And that's why in the autumn budget last year, the office was announced. It was particularly reviewing how government can use AI, automation and data in new ways to drive public sector productivity and wider economic benefits, and then that feeds into the wider government innovation strategy. And I think the point about having a dedicated office is that they again have the time to ask those questions and to push government and to push departments and ministers to think about how we embed AI and the use of, say, data sharing particularly in public procurement and in the way that services are being provided. I think, as ever with these things, if it was left to individual departments, we probably would get there. But I think having a separate office and experts there provides the opportunity for challenge and also for them to look around the world and to see expertise and best practice elsewhere, which we can then take on board.
Sure, thank you for that. But jumping further, Nikolai, how are things in Norway?
Well, they're great, thank you. We've started work on a new national strategy for AI, which we will hopefully complete before Christmas. And as part of that process, I've had meetings with, or hearings with different parts of society, small businesses, startups, government authorities. And what the discussion always ends up in is about data. It's about providing sufficient amounts of data, it's about the quality of data, it's about structuring data, I think that is maybe one of the crucial roles of government, is making available the right kind of data with the right quality to be able to actually apply AI solutions, both in the public and the private sector. In the health sector, we have actually taken this a step further. So we're now creating a separate health data program. We have, both in Norway and some of the other Nordic countries, quite unique data sets in the health sector on a population-wide basis. In this health data program, our aim is to make data available both for research and commercial use and for improving treatment. And structure them in such a way that they are useful. Because, as you know, with data, if you have enough of it, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's difficult. One of our hospitals is also working specifically on developing an AI that can give a much more precise treatment of cancer based on the data sets that we have, and they've come a long way, and now the AI 2.5 years into the project is a lot more efficient in providing the right kind of treatment for patients compared to human pathologists. So there's a huge potential here in many areas, and we need to make use of the data in a proper way. Some of the other things that we're working on as well is we have regulatory sandboxes in a couple of areas. Autonomous vehicles is one of them. So we're testing out autonomous buses in 5 different locations in Norway. And actually the autonomous bus that you have here in Tallinn has actually been tested in Norway first. So it didn't drive here by itself, but it drove over there, and then now it drives here. We also have actually allocated one of our fjords for autonomous ships. So we're allowing this cautious testing of autonomous ships and vehicles in some areas before we unleash it on society at large, and I think that's a good approach. We're also setting up a new regulatory sandbox on fintech, financial technology, which will be up and running hopefully by 1st of January. And many of our government services are testing out these, applying AI on different use cases. We have the Norwegian State Education Loan Fund, using it to improve control with payments and make sure that students are who they say they are, and so forth. And so far that has been a great success. We have the customs authorities using predictive analytics to improve their hit rate, to put it that way. Police is using this. We have the National Library have developed their own AI and search engine. So in many areas we're using this, but we're still, I think, scratching the surface of what will be possible. And in my view, it's not about the technology. It's about 3 things. It's about culture, it's about leadership, and it's about competence. And just let me elaborate quickly on that. I think in terms of culture, it's about moving from defining the solution to the problem to defining the problem you want to solve. And that requires, I think, a different mindset in many parts of government. And then having a leadership that actually backs up the people working on this and allows them to fail. Because I think, especially in the public sector, our tolerance for failure is very, very low, and it should be low because we spend taxpayers' money, so we need to be able to succeed. But if we are to actually make use of the new possibilities, we also have to experiment, test out new things, and that requires leaders to actually back their employees, and make sure that they are allowed to test things, and that we can have a bottom-up approach, driven by those who actually know where the problems are and how things can be improved. And in order to do that, of course, you need competence, and this is going to be difficult, because if you talk to private companies, they are hiring people with technology backgrounds to a much higher degree than they used to. And I just spoke to one of the biggest banks in Norway, and they say that 50% of their new recruits have a technology background. So they're moving from being a bank to becoming a technology company. Now, how are we going to compete with that in the public sector? Do we have the right competence to be able to make use of those new possibilities? These are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. But all in all, I know my time is running out. I think some of the issues that we need to be cooperating on is the ethical approach to AI. So transparency, accountability, trust. We need to get that right. It needs to be a human-centric approach. I think the EU high-level expert group has provided a good starting point, but that discussion needs to continue. Because if people don't trust this technology, then we will never be able to take out the full potential.
Thank you. Lots of points. Lots of points that we can actually pick up exactly for the discussion. But perhaps Elisabeth, and going to Austria now.
Thanks a lot. First of all, I apologize. I'll be more on the receiving line of information than on the giving line of information. But what I can underline and completely agree to is what you said in your last remarks. It's more on the philosophical and on the psychological areas that we need to find out how to bring our citizens onto the field that we want to handle. For what we do in Austria right now is we're trying, and this is probably part of the outcome of the what was it called, the digital single market strategy meeting that we had last year in Austria. We tried to move from the old, very old-fashioned kind of administration that we have, not to e-government, but to m-government. We're building the basis for this, and while we're doing various parts and in modules, if you like, in parts and pieces, we are trying to foster understanding and belief in what we do. So this basically is where we're trying to go now. We do have company-based high standards of AI, but in our government we still lag behind. And I was very interested to hear about the how did you call it, your ethic group, your
The Center for Data and Ethics.
Okay, the Center for Data and Ethics, and I'd love to pick up on this idea if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. But perhaps from Austria all the way to Australia, Randall.
Thank you, Siim. I've really enjoyed the morning, and I think it's going to be a great day. As far as Australia is concerned, it's quite consistent with other discussions that have gone on this panel and earlier today. We're very much focused on being clear about the problem that we're trying to solve, rather than starting with how can we apply a new technology in a way that is not linked to an outcome that provides better services to people and businesses. With that said, we have started to make use of augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence to some degree in a range of our business lines. I was having a discussion at dinner last night where I was talking about some of the applications we'd made of AI in our virtual assistants and chatbots, and the person I was speaking with told me that that was boring. So that aside, we are doing some interesting things when it comes to chatbots and virtual assistants. And so we have a range, particularly in our human services portfolio. I think we have 5 that provide streamlined access into information held by government. So facilitating navigation in a way that kind of streamlines that customer experience. Also in our business dealings with the community, our taxation office also uses virtual assistants in providing ready access to information. What is slightly more interesting and I think progressive in thinking is where we've explored the application of virtual assistants in the disability space. A chatbot which was named Nadia that has the capacity to interact with disability support recipients, that was being built to be able to interact with the individual by reading facial signals and demonstrating empathy, which was ahead of its time, but provided us with great insights as to the potential of chatbots beyond simply navigating you to a more suitable response to an FAQ. We're also using AI to make sense of very complex data holdings that are becoming more complex. Nikolai spoke about the customs and trade environment. We have been using that in Australia for a number of years, and as you start to get more sensors and more data flowing through, finding the signal and the noise can be complex without some kind of facilitated analysis of that data. So being able to make sense of information in relation to risk assessment is a way that we've been using AI. Square kilometre array is a really interesting project. It was conceived back in 1991. It will be producing scientific observations in about 2027, so it is still quite a long lead time. But if you imagine a square kilometre of collection, being able to interrogate and make sense of the information that flows through requires support of a significant nature. And so the thinking we're doing is how can we make sense of what will be an incredible source of information if only we're able to digest that. More practically, our science organisation and an element of that called Data 61 has products that it has produced, one for bushfire prediction and analysis, which takes significant inputs when it comes to previous fire events, weather observations, vegetation, terrain, and then uses that to be able to predict the likelihood of bushfires, which is a major problem in Australia. We've had a very early bushfire season with major fires up in our northern state Queensland over the last month. But being able to actually use that information and make sense of it and then apply that into models is, I think, a really practical use. And again, practically, in another Data 61 project, Australia spends about $1.4 billion per annum in reactive repairs of water pipes. We're collecting information and then predicting failures rather than responding to failures, and the estimate is that that will cut the cost of repair in half, so saving $700 million a year for water pipes. And so there are lots of other examples. I was involved in border protection for a number of years. We use for automation biometric capabilities that allow us to risk assess in real time to facilitate a better experience for travellers in airports. And again, that's the business problem that we were looking to solve. And as far as lessons, I think that focus, Nanjira mentioned it in her panel session, focus on the people and the problem you're trying to solve, rather than how you might be able to apply this technology, where industry is very keen to come and talk about their capability and how they might sell that to you depending on a problem that you might have that fits, but starting with the problem and then applying the technology. Trust has been a theme that has been consistent, I think, throughout. Explainability, I think, is important from the point of view of being able to understand in aggregate how decisions are influenced by AI and the societal impacts, so how you deal with bias, how you deal with inclusion, and the ethics of AI. For those who are interested, there was a discussion paper that was released in April in Australia that was looking at the ethics of AI. We have a set of principles that have been consulted. That consultation ended at the end of May, but that's available and provides, I think, a useful framework to refer back to when it comes to ethics. And finally, capability, and a number of people have mentioned this. We need the skills, and I really like the comment, if you want to go far, go together. We do need to think collectively about how we can both build skills in our own contexts, but also more broadly how we can share experience to be able to move beyond pilots and create enduring production capability.
Thank you. And I mean, the way you describe sort of Nadia is to say that, I mean, this is clearly an example where you just go beyond just reaping efficiencies, but also actually adding complete new value that hasn't been there before for the people like that. Thank you. But continuing on the other side of the world, Aki-san, perhaps you want to say the Japanese experience.
I'll be short to give more time to other people. All right. Okay. The Japanese government prepared social principles of human-centric AI and AI strategy this year. However, regarding the actual usage of AI, it is still at the trial stage for the central government. Comparing to the central government, the local governments are more advanced to use AI for their services. So I'd like to explain just one example. And that's Saitama City, which is near Tokyo, and uses AI for assigning nurseries to each child in consideration of parental requests. Japan has a pretty serious issue of nursery shortage. And it was a complicated task to assign 8,000 children to 300 nurseries. Before the implementation of AI, 20 to 30 staffs spent a week assigning. After the implementation, it spent only a few seconds. The results were almost the same as if staffs were to do it. We can implement this system with a few adjustments, only few adjustments. We expect to recoup our investment in AI in 2 or 3 years. And more than 50 municipalities have tried as of March this year. Thank you.
Thank you. But to briefly still put you on the spot, I mean, I know that the strategy for the Japanese government and AI is quite comprehensive. Are there any good examples in how you are trying to exactly scale and get more agencies to try it out? Any good sort of ideas on that? How to get more action going?
AI strategy?
Yeah.
That's what I don't have details. Yeah, I'm checking right now. It was established recently by other organizations, so I'm checking right now.
Thank you, thank you. But coming back to Europe, Karol and Poland.
Thank you, Siim. Yeah, so probably will not be a surprise that Poland is working on its national strategy on AI, as probably most of us here. The project is under consultation right now, and I think the keyword from the strategy will be efficiency, like knowing the fact that the scarce funds and the fact that it should be any money we invest should have very good outcomes. And I completely agree here with Randall that there should be a real use case behind it, and not for sure implementing AI. So that's why we are looking at the policy level, let's say the competences and then implementation. And in case of the police, for example, we were thinking of whether we should establish, encourage the universities to have one central, faculty dealing with, for example, AI ethics. But in the end, what we agreed on with the university community is to create what we have called the virtual faculty of law and ethics. So it's combining the most prominent professors dealing with ethics, with ICT, in the council that would advise the government on the possible support, how to support the development and implementation of AI solutions. At the same time, also to do some research and monitoring, being, getting some tasks from the government, and in the end, come up with some possible legislative changes or guidelines on using AI. So in the end, creating some common agreement around something that will be then easier, I think, to implement and to share if it's already discussed from the very beginning. The similar body that we are now establishing is called, let's say, the AI Observatory. Here again is the efficiency at the forefront. Let's say if someone else did it already and it worked, let's replicate it basically. So let's do it again. So to make sure here again, in both in case of a policy and the solutions, to have the best possible knowledge on the current state of play in Poland, in case of commercial sector, and also in other countries. Now, as an example for education, what we learned also from some surveys that apart from what I agree with what you have said, that we need a specialist to develop AI, I think what we found out is that we also need to build some awareness around the users of AI, both to make them, let's say, not to be afraid, but at the same time know about the risks and create build the picture of the potential and the risks connected with AI. And we have delivered here. We are currently, will be launching very soon, like a portal with some digital content and digital courses that the people can take and can learn with their own pace something more about the foundation, basic principles of AI. Now, in terms of implementation, what we found out are, let's say, the two opposite situations. First of all, we have a number of initiatives around the voice bots or chat box currently in place, which we found out, preparing our national strategy, which in the end makes those efforts not fully efficient because you don't get the full scale, and then you, to some extent, may waste money. So what we are now making sure that whatever project connected with AI is now being started at the government level, is to make sure that, first of all, it can be reused. So in terms of intellectual property and some, the structure that the other government institutions can benefit from it, and at the same time that we avoid the situations that there are very similar projects going on at the same time. In case of some examples from our side, what we found out that would be something interesting, this is something the project is currently going on, let's say in a proof of concept phase, is using the AI to, let's say, to do some kind of auto routing of the official correspondence that is sent to public administration, to make sure that the first filter, the first, let's say, trace to where and who should take care of given topic is suggested, as recommended by the AI underneath, using analyzing basically the language and looking for some key phrases in the text. Because apart from some e-services that use the forms, there's still some inflow of correspondence that costs basically time and money when you process it. And another example that the project is currently going on is using the AI in terms of, let's say, of more like cybersecurity area is. First of all, the identification of disinformation activities online, so trying to find out the way to spot an activities that might need any reaction from the government on some, or at least to initiate some analysis, and at the same time also using AI to search and detect the content that may lead to sexual abuse of children. This is again, something I think was mentioned also today by someone else, that another way of actually having the filter that can help us react as fast as possible to such situations. And the last example, not the least advanced, but with the highest potential thing in Poland, is of course all the developments in the agriculture area. Poland is still the agriculture economy plays has a big share in our economy. And here we're working with the Minister of Agriculture. We're definitely looking at the chances to use some geographic information systems of also analyzing the data that could help us identify some the natural disasters like fire, like flood, and also to see and spot the potential impact of what the economy, the industry is doing on the quality of soil, the quality of air. So I think from our perspective, what we would like to do is to start small, start with doing some proof of concepts or some pilots, and then when it proves to be beneficial, then go and scale up. Thank you.
Thank you. I love it already how the different examples of useful use cases that pop up clearly show the approach that Randall brought out, sort of fixing or solving, trying to solve concrete problems, and reflecting the different sort of backgrounds of what fields or issues are of priority in different countries, right? So great. Marianne, Denmark.
Yes, thank you, Siim. In Denmark, the government launched its first national AI strategy earlier this year in March, so I think it's very similar to the other countries around the table. When we developed the AI strategy, we looked into what were the strongholds and also the challenges in Denmark, and I think they are very similar to what you have described. One stronghold in Denmark is that we have a very high level of data quality, and also especially like Norway in the healthcare sector, we have a lot of data and we're very used to working with these data. Moreover, in Denmark, we have a very strong tradition on digitalization and also a very strong digital fundament. And also a tradition for working together, not only between the different level of government, which is municipalities and regions and the state level, but also working together with private companies. The last thing, very important thing, is that we have a very high level of trust in government in Denmark. I think more than 80 or 90%, depending on how you measure it, has a high level of trust in government. But what we also saw is that the introduction of new technologies, increased use of data, put some question marks on some of these strongholds. Especially the increased use of data has been very much on the political agenda in Denmark for the last couple of years, because it creates so many new possibilities, but also raises so many new questions. So I think also, like you described, Nicky, in UK, the question on data and data ethics is very high on the political agenda. And in Denmark, it has been decided to establish a sort of like a new independent data ethical council, which has just had its first meeting here in August. So that was one of the challenges. Another one is that Denmark is a very small country. So even though we have a relatively high level of investments also in research environments, it's compared to other countries in numbers, it's not so large. So we're very dependent on the development in other countries as well, and of course also especially the European collaboration. What we also saw that we had to look into more flexible ways of working together between the public and the private sector, because the development is so fast. Traditionally, we've been working very much together with private companies, also on developing the digital infrastructure in Denmark, but doing so has often involved large-scale tenders and stuff like that. That's not very suitable for some of the challenges that we face right now. So that's also a part of it. And And then, of course, also having the right skills. It's also a very difficult area in Denmark as well. But not only the specialized skills, I think, is important, but also, in fact, the skills of the sort of like normal public employee who has to be able to see the possibilities in the new technologies in their everyday work. So that's also a very strong, we have a very important initiative on that as well. But as I said before, we developed this AI strategy trying to address some of these challenges. And I think one very important way of doing this is also to start up with some smaller scale projects. We call them signature projects. Because what we found out is that we have to learn how to tackle these challenges, and we have to do it in a very, we think, concrete way, because it is also very difficult not only to discuss this in the abstract, that's one part of it, but also you have to do it in a very concrete way. So now, together with the municipalities and the regions, we will start 15 small-scale projects, a lot of them also in the healthcare sector, but also in other welfare sectors as well, and trying to, as a part of the projects, to tackle the legal obstacles, to tackle the ethical obstacles, to tackle the obstacles related to having the right skills and the right persons, and the collaboration between the public and the private sector. And what we can see right now is, in fact, that we only have, in the municipalities, only around 5% of the municipalities have implemented AI, but they very much expect this number to rise dramatically in the coming years. So I think we've just seen the start of the wave in Denmark. We can see the same pattern in the small and medium-sized private companies, whereas the larger companies has a little bit of a higher uptake in AI already. But if I just conclude with a few maybe use cases that has already been implemented in Denmark, I can mention one, which is in the healthcare sector, where we have Danish alarm centers that receive thousands of calls every day, and the staff has a very important task to identify if the person calling has a heart attack. Of course, doing so quickly is very important. It's a matter of life or death. But now a Danish company has developed a system that has been listening into a lot of previous calls. And now the system is more, not only faster, but also more accurate in prediction whether or not this has to do with a heart attack or not than the human listener itself. And I think that's a very good example of how to implement AI in the public sector. And the solution will also soon be applied throughout the healthcare sector.
Thank you. And I think you brought up quite a few sort of points, especially, yes, I mean, something we perhaps want to dwell into the future again, which is to say, yeah, one of the ways to leverage and scale is to have new novel ways of working with the private sector, of course. Being soon, I know that AI is a core part of making Singapore smart, if not the smartest nation on earth. So you want to go into that?
Thank you, Siim. I think thank you for this opportunity to really share about the application of AI to derive public value in Singapore. Now, this application of AI in the Singapore public sector, I think, need to be seen in the context of the larger digital government blueprint that we actually launched last year. This digital government blueprint that we launched rests on two core principles: how the government can be digital to the core, and number two principle is how can we continue to serve with heart. I think we truly believe that the application of AI can help government not just to do things better, but actually to do better things. So I think many of the early speakers have already spoken about using AI in healthcare, in security services, and in agriculture. The last sector being one that Singapore doesn't have, so I have not much value to add. So maybe let me frame the application of AI in deriving public value broadly in three areas. One is what I call in policy development, two is what I call in operations management, and three in service delivery. So in the area of policy making, we have been using AI in Singapore to derive data-driven insights to actually inform policy reviews as well as changes. And I'll give you an example, and that is the use of the clustering analysis. So we're using unsupervised machine learning algorithms to actually identify patterns or characteristics of specific at-risk population, which can then be used for us to devise policy interventions. So the results of this analysis are then being used to derive also insights on the beneficiaries of these policies. We then use it to adjust the policy parameters to better target policy. Still sound quite abstract, but I'll give you a specific example. So the Social Services Office, for example, are using this data to better understand the profile of the customers, of our citizens, and then to identify new unserved segments in order to better target outreach efforts. So that's an example of the use of AI for policy development. Two, in the area of operations management, we have been using AI to improve the operations by raising efficiency, as well as to freeing up the man hours to focus on higher value-added tasks. And I'll give you two quick examples on that. One is in the area of anomaly detection. AI has indeed been quite effective to detect anomalous data points or patterns within large and complex data sets. So we use historical claim patterns to detect anomalies in the claim submission, to develop an AI fraud detection system. This is to use to highlight claims that require further investigation. And again, through an iterative process, the confirmed fraudulent claims are then being fed back into the algorithms so that we can detect future fraudulent claims much better. So we are using that to detect fraudulent claims on many of the training grants and schemes that we have. Two is on the use of computer vision. I think many of you would know that computer visions require a huge amount of data, as well as the collection and processing of this information. We have developed and deployed a computer vision drowning detection system that is deployed in our public pools in Singapore. So we use a network of overhead infrared cameras. The system enables you to detect detection of possible drowning, and it appears that if the head bobs below the water for about 10 seconds, that's a trigger point for a person who is possibly being drowning. So we deployed that to allow the lifeguards to actually spot some of these distressed swimmers more quickly and making our pools safer. And three is in the area of service delivery. Randall spoke about the use of chatbots. That's one area. But I think beyond the use of chatbot, we think AI can be used to deliver more targeted and, in fact, more personalized service intervention. And I'll give you an example of actually using predictive analytics to inform appropriate intervention. So we have this website called My Careers Future. It's a national job portal providing our job seekers with a smart search service, and we inbuilt an AI recommender system to help them match more closely to jobs based on their skills and competencies. So those are the three broad areas we think AI can be used in policy development, in operations management, and in service delivery. So what are the lessons that we learned? Again, just three quick points. I also agree with Randall about the importance to first define the problem rather than to jump into the solution. So we try to adopt what we call a use case-driven AI approach, which means not just doing AI for the sake of it, but applying AI to solve a well-defined problem and to deliver impact. And this actually requires the technologies to work very closely with the business users to co-create the solutions. And in fact, I think we realized very soon that the successful application of AI only happens not just with the data scientists, but partnering the data scientists with the domain subject matter experts to frame the solution. Two is on data. I think enough has been said about the need for quality data. We are developing a government data architecture, and we are setting up what we call trusted centers in individual and businesses, in geospatial and in sensor. So this trusted center has the need to be able to allow public sector agencies to have access to core government data sets that are clean and usable. Of course, this access to data has been balanced by data security. We have put in place legislations that criminalize the abuse and the unauthorized re-identification of individuals. And we're also undertaking a review of our data security and management practices to ensure a stronger data security regime. And finally, the third point is really the need for deep, but not just deep and broad capabilities in the public sector on AI. We are building up a central capability center within the Government Technology Agency on AI to be able to acquire the deep technology capabilities to support our agencies. At the same time, developing central platforms like what Estonia is doing to make available some of these open source platforms for agency to use. But it's not just about the hiring of data scientists. I think many governments are excited with the data scientists that can exploit and visualize the data. What we found that in order for the data scientists to first get their work done, we need to employ a trove of data engineers. The not so nice term is called the data janitors, because essentially they're the one that actually do the plumbing work, to actually cleanse the data, structure it correctly. And if you don't focus on get that right, you can forget about trying to exploit the data. So we are now focusing on getting data engineers to actually clean some of our data. At the same time, beyond the deep capabilities, we are trying to broaden the understanding of AI to a larger segment of the public officers. So we have data literacy courses to uplift it so that they can apply AI in their daily work. So that's what we are doing in Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the sort of slogan that you have been using exactly, not just to do things better, but to do better things, I think this is something for all of us to aspire to.
Yeah.
But I will now open up the round. Thank you for all of you for some quick kind of reflections, perhaps just by show of hands. Anything you want to pick up as sort of follow-up point or so forth. Any one of the panel members. And this will be a test of Estonian patience again. Yes, please.
It was fascinating listening to lots of the similarities, but also the differences that people are exploring. Just 2 points. One was, I was really pleased that Randall mentioned disability, actually, because I think, and your use of autonomous vehicles, because I hadn't really thought about it until I had a recent conversation with somebody. We think about autonomous vehicles, we're talking about road efficiency, and I think people are nervous about what that might mean. And then somebody said, well, actually, for somebody with a visual impairment or who is not able to drive at the moment and has to rely on other people to get them around, actually the opportunity offered by autonomous vehicles is enormous. So I'm not just reliant perhaps on public transport. And just the other one, I'm very happy to obviously talk to Elisabeth separately about the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. But just they've published, actually, if you look online on the gov.uk website, they've published them into reports. But what they're particularly looking at is about online targeting, so people knowing how their data is used, so understanding how they're targeted, but also about unconscious or bias in decision making. And so before I did this job, I was chairing the Select Committee on Finance in the House of Commons, and we were talking there about decisions made by finance companies using AI and whether there's a possibility, which I'm sure there is, of bias and how do you correct for it. So some interesting discussions.
Thank you. Thank you. Good example now for others to follow. This will be a show whether you have earned your lunch soon.
Just a quick thing to add, and it comes to the discussion that we've had about explainability. I imagine that most countries have in their principles the need for the capacity to be able to contest decisions, and contestability and explainability are very closely linked, but just thinking about how you deliver on that principle, that if a person is impacted by a decision that is either made or influenced by AI, how you're able to support that process of contestability to ensure that people are treated as you would expect and how you'd originally designed your policy.
Good point. Please.
Well, I think that's a crucial point, and if you can't contest it and if you can't trace the decision, then we can't use the system. That's my view on this. For instance, when we handle applications for universities and colleges, there are no humans involved at all in Norway. But you need to be able to explain why a person didn't get in if the person complains. And I think this is crucial, otherwise it's not going to work. So, but this is a big question. What do we need to know about the algorithms? What do we need to know about what's in the black box? And if we're talking about autonomous vehicles, it raises a whole big new set of questions. And I think this is something that we need to work more on, and this is also something that we can't solve by ourselves. I think there needs to be, we can't have, for instance, in the EU, 28 different views on what kind of, how we apply these rules or ethical guidelines. So there needs to be a common approach, and I think also outside Europe, that would be beneficial. I would like to ask if a question, because if we are to succeed with government or AI in government, we need to tap into both what's in the private sector and the collaboration between the public and private sector is going to be important, but also what's in academia and research institutions. Now in Norway we have the different institutions that work on AI have actually they've joined together in a network, which I think is great because they're exploiting each other's strengths and realizing that this is too big for any one institution, so they need to work together. But then how do we tap into that knowledge as a public sector? How do we make sure that these autonomous institutions are useful also in our government application of AI? And if anybody has any great examples from your countries, it would be nice to hear them.
Thank you. I think Karol brought up a few points that you are working on in Poland, but perhaps if I put Randall, you on a spot, you didn't go into that too deep, but you brought up data 61, which at least always to me has been a very interesting sort of, model in a way to solve what Nikolai is asking for. I don't know if you want to sort of go a bit into that.
Yes, so to Nikolai's point, Data 61 is an agency within CSIRO, which is our Commonwealth scientific organisation. And Data 61 draws on the broadest range of PhDs and academics in Australia who collectively help to solve problems of national or international significance. And so I think as far as a model that could be analysed and potentially useful, Data 61 I think has characteristics that may be worth investigating.
Anyone else? Karol?
Just yes, I have like a few reflections from my side. Well, regarding what Nikolai was saying is, I think the challenge I think that we are all facing is that we would like to have the solutions as transparent as possible, as safe as possible, like and perfect in the way, in the situation where actually to reach this perfection, the given solution requires a lot of time and requires a lot of effort. So I think the way of implementation, and actually it all solves also the problem I think here of this transparency and explainability, is start using AI in the situation where it actually does not replace the human, but actually support the human. So actually like as a first filter or the augmentation of the work, like given some suggestion that in the end still has to be verified by person. And in the end, by doing this process in the way of being an advisor, not a decision maker, you then collect the data. In the end, you reach the point where you can actually say that decisions are actually 100% exact with what actually the human was doing. So, so this is one comment. Another comment, I think that you might think of a chat box in an e-commerce store and a chat box in, let's say, the working in a court. And then, of course, depending on the application, in the end, you might also say that there's not exactly the same quality or the same accuracy that you can actually expect from those two solutions. You can still accept, let's say, some level of error in the solutions that have like low impact, but still be very strict on the ones that have some at the end some life or some being sentence at stake. So I think it's not actually in regulating the technology as such, but the application of the technology that I think we should look at.
Thank you. Aki.
Quick comment. This may be already said, but I'm thinking one important thing is to use AI. The amount of data is important. One more thing is quality of data. And we are discussing this with our people right now.
Siim.
Yes, please.
No, I think there's a great opportunity for public sector cooperation in AI, particularly on the data side. And I think if we think about the role of government in that, I can think of 3 roles. I mean, government as a producer of the data, which is quite clear because we have so much of the data that we sit. Government as a regulator, which we kind of spoke about, right? But I think the third is, I think we should not ignore the power of the government as a convener, of bringing the different parties together, right? Because I think in this space, at least in most of our societies, government being the one that has the highest level of trust, we can be a convener to bring the different parties together. Because we all know that at the end of the day, the data in silos doesn't work. It is a fusion of data that actually create a greater value. And it was in this regard that I wanted to perhaps turn it around to Nicky, because I heard this mention of the data trust that you were setting up together with the private sector. Perhaps, be for the benefit for all of us, share a little bit about this data trust. What is the setup, the structure like, and what are some of the early projects being worked on? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I heard the data trust being mentioned.
Well, thank you. I mean, it is early days, so it's still really being looked at. But the idea being to ask some of the tough questions, and as you say, to bring people together from different backgrounds as to exactly how data can be used, and having that mechanism. So they're pilots basically. We are partnering with the Open Data Institute at Innovate UK, and there are these three pilots, tackling illegal wildlife trade, reducing food waste, and improving public services in one particular local authority area. And I think the questions being asked are, how do we make sure that data sharing is legal, fair, ethical, safe, and portable? So how do you use AI technology to tackle some of those things? And I think it won't be easy. Those are some pretty tough questions. They're all challenges that need to be addressed, which I think builds on earlier comments, which is actually thinking about the problem, and then how AI and data sharing can help with that. May I just answer one of Nikolai's points as well about, because I think you rightly said the public, private sector and academia as well, and I mentioned in my earlier remarks the government's industrial strategy and the identification again of 5 grand challenges, and one of those is the use of AI. And so then in November last year, the sector deal, what we call the sector deal on AI, was published, and that is a partnership between business and academia and government. There's a lot of government investment into different research projects, supporting doctorates at universities, lots and lots of different projects, some of which of course will be successful, and some of which rightly won't, and that's the point about permission to fail. But then I think the evidence and results from that being fed back to both government and to private sector to see how the results can then be used for the good of society.
Thank you, and I think at the very least, the things we can do is to also basically put out more sort of research challenges out there, right? So this is actually the direction we are working for in Estonia here, more widely in digital government and cybersecurity space, but also in AI, saying that if we're trying to work on some of the applications in public sector, perhaps there's sort of questions behind all the way to philosophy, right? That we should perhaps be getting some more answers from also from our research community and so forth. Now, I have the very hard job in a sense that I have to break one promise to keep another one. So I unfortunately have to break the promise that I was really sort of hoping for to keep, to allow for questions from the audience, and I do apologize for that. But because I have to keep a promise to my Prime Minister and get the heads of delegation to lunch on times, more or less. But I do want to thank you all for this discussion. As always, there's so much more to delve in. I'm glad that a few points already came up in terms of where the ministers and all of us can grab each other by the button and go further deeper into sharing beyond today. It's about sort of exactly these sort of exchanges that will last beyond just one event here. Perhaps just in terms of very small summary, I think I heard quite a few sort of directions and things we can continue sharing, and in terms of how to build this capacity in our public sectors to scale use of AI, whether it's the platform approach in building components that can be reused also beyond public sector, whether to build up exactly units of coordination and expertise one way or another, whether it's opening up more data, whether it's sort of putting out some standards and guidelines there, all the way to ethics and so forth, boosting up research and sort of involving the research community, as well as of course finding novel ways to work with the private sector. And so the simplest things, I mean, that we all have to work on, and will take time, but skills development throughout, exactly, specialists to our sort of public sector colleagues, and sharing through observatories and otherwise the stories and the examples out there. I think there's quite a bit of ground also exactly to collaborate in some of these directions, not the least to say exactly the tools and the models and the platforms we build up, if they're open for each other, exactly, let's make them available like that. With that, thank you sincerely. Prime Minister is at least waiting all of us, and enjoy lunch, everybody. Thank you.